the Maryland Manufacturers Extension Partnership, and we have several people here from them representing as well. Brandon Kennedy, and I believe Margie is here as well. I can't see the complete list. In addition, we also have Mike Kelleher, who's the Executive Director for MEP, and he's going to talk about some of the initiatives that they're working on at the very end, which can obviously benefit manufacturers from Maryland. So let me go ahead and get started. As I said, as the manufacturing industry embraces this digital transformation through automation, interconnectivity, machine learning, Internet of Things, IoT, industrial IoT, industrial Internet of Things, AI, and real-time data, this threat of cyber attacks increases exponentially. Okay, so Industry 4.0. It focuses on the partnership between the physical product and operations and smart technology. And thus we're achieving this connected ecosystem, which is wonderful, which is what we want, right? More connectivity. With this adaptation of Industry 4.0, the manufacturing sector is achieving this unprecedented collaboration along with a boost to efficiency and profitability in organizations, which sounds wonderful, and that's exactly what we want. However, the manufacturing industry is also experiencing a significant rise in cyber attacks. Okay, just recently, this past Wednesday, the CISA director Jen Easterly tweeted out, as more critical manufacturing plants move to adopt, she said, robotic process automation, or if we're moving towards this, or Industry 4.0, Industry 5.0 is coming out due to COVID. And I would suggest that also probably with the impending or the current situation with Ukraine, that bad actors would have more opportunities to take advantage of those vulnerabilities. So with current events and whatnot, I think she's letting us know that it's not just something that is going to disappear anytime soon. So over the past year, though, the industrial sector experienced notable attacks, with manufacturing actually named as the most attacked industry in 2021, which I thought that was really interesting. That was actually a 2022 X-Force Threat Intelligence Report by IBM. So, and I would also be remiss if I didn't mention a few notable cyber attacks that maybe everybody has been talking about. And they're actually discussed in the Dragos 2021 ICSOT Cybersecurity Year in Review report, which is available through their site, just to let you know. But I know you've probably heard of maybe the Colonial Pipeline attack, maybe something along those lines. JBS Foods, Old Tamar Water System, New Cooperative. These are all industrial sectors that are being attacked. They're being targeted for cybersecurity purposes. And unfortunately, a single attack can be very damaging in several ways. You can include financial loss, reputational loss, operational disruption, client company data loss, fines. The list goes on and on. So that's just a few of the consequences. So as such, within this industrial control systems operational technology community, or ICSO2 as we call it, cybersecurity is imperative now to maintain operations and continue that business growth that we're so enjoying. And with that, I'd like to move on to our esteemed panelists to share their expertise with you today. They are Dr. Tim Schilbach. He is the CEO of Penacity. Robert M. Lee, who's the founder and CEO of Dragos. Jason Schaum, he is the Cybersecurity Advisor and State Coordinator for the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, as it's commonly known. We have Aaron Vernon, who's the VP for U.S. Manufacturing TCR Squared Therapeutics. And we also have Chip Stewart, who is our CISO from the state of Maryland. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each panelist, and I'll go ahead and address you. I would like them to introduce themselves to you and just talk about their role within their cybersecurity and or manufacturing community. So since I started with Dr. Tim Schilbach, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself and talk about what you do within this community?
Yeah, absolutely, Kimberly. Thank you very much for having us out here today. And we're blessed to be in the presence of such an esteemed set of colleagues out there. So I want to thank my colleagues for joining us as well. So just a little bit about us. We work a lot within the federal government sector in supply chain sort of security area. So we do provide some managed SOC services, but mostly we're working within the Department of Energy, secret systems, critical infrastructure, stuff like that. Out there that we provide everything from SOC services to incident response. So ICS, I think, is one of the most underserved areas within our community itself, because we're starting to see a convergence of enterprise systems and, of course, industrial control and automation systems all kind of converging together. And then, of course, now you have the Internet of Things converging into that as well, creating these things, the perfect storm, if you will, out there. So as we get into the panel, I think we'll discuss that more in depth, but that's just a little bit about us and some of the situations that we work with now. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you, Tim. That's great. Thank you very much. We look forward to discussing these with you. The next person I'd like to introduce himself, of course, is Robert M. Lee, and he is the founder and the CEO of Dragos.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, Dragos is an industrial cybersecurity firm. So all we focus on is kind of the automation and plant floor side of the house, tech services and intel for that piece. But my background, started my career on the Air Force side of the house, spent most of my time over the National Security Agency, and built out the U.S. government's mission looking at state actors breaking into industrial systems. So as you can imagine, things are more and more interesting these days, and happy to share any of those insights. And then we had our year in review report that we put out last week. It's out on the website, where we looked at kind of all the threats and incident response cases that we dealt with last year. And what was pretty clear, referencing your IBM report, was that manufacturing was definitely the most hit, but especially because of the ransomware issues. I think a lot of that comes from the fact that most folks didn't realize that the plant side of the house was even connected up, and it has been for a long, long time. And adversaries sure have noticed, and ransomware, as bad as it may be, ends up being a free pen test for a lot of folks. So it's something we all got to be taking a little bit closer look at.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rob. We look forward to all those insights that you're going to share with us, I think. The next person I'd like to introduce is Jason Schaum. He is with CISA. Jason?
Thanks, Kimberly. Yeah, happy to be here this morning. And yeah, so Jason Schaum, I started my cybersecurity career journey about 20 years ago. I was a night shift network security analyst defending DoD networks and high performance computing systems. So got my hands dirty, spent a lot of time analyzing threats in the technical weeds, writing intrusion detection signatures, but then ran 24/7 security operations center for the DoD, and then ran a portfolio of primarily defensive cyber operations contracts and operations for a consulting company. And now I am the cybersecurity advisor and state coordinator for Maryland. So I spend most of my time engaging with all critical infrastructure organizations. So across all 16 sectors of critical infrastructure, my job is to be their connection into DHS CISA. CISA has been getting a lot of resources, a lot of funding, and a lot of responsibility over the last couple of years. And we're here really to help all critical infrastructure organizations improve their security posture, make them aware of all of the capabilities, tools that the federal government has to offer. There are a lot of no-cost services there for critical infrastructure, and so spending a lot of my time out in the field working with those critical infrastructure organizations to assess their current risk posture and put defenses in place to protect themselves from the various threats that are out there. And as you mentioned, there's just been a significant increase, and especially with COVID, as everybody wanted to be able to log into their control systems remotely, so they didn't have to go into the office. A large surface area there for attackers to take advantage of. So I'm helping those organizations kind of close those holes. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you so much. Wonderful. I look forward to hearing on the rest of that. Thank you with the resources and whatnot and the efforts that CISA is doing. Aaron Vernon, you are next up on my list as with TCR Squared. Can you please introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Thanks, Kimberly. Hi, everyone. I'm Aaron Vernon. I'm the VP of Manufacturing for TCR Squared Therapeutics. We're a clinical stage developer of autologous T-cell therapies for treating solid tumors for cancer. I'm there at the company. I'm responsible for delivery of all of our products to our patients. unlike everyone else who's on the panel, I don't come from the at this from the cybersecurity perspective. I come from the manufacturing perspective. So I've 20 plus years in pharma and biotech, making life-saving and life-changing drugs for treating cancer, autoimmune disease, et cetera. And in this case, I come from it because we're building a manufacturing facility in Maryland, which will be our first internal manufacturing facility. We will get to this, I'm sure, but I was a little bit concerned about the threats, if you will, that we're going to have to deal with the network design and the automation we intended. So we decided to do something about it, and that's how I found my way here. So good to meet you all.
Great. Thank you so much, Aaron. So Aaron brings us a special perspective from the manufacturing side, which I think is also very important to take a look at with this particular conversation. So our last panelist is Chip Stewart. He's our CISO from Maryland. Chip, would you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Kimberly. So my name is Chip Stewart. I'm the State Chief Information Security Officer, which by executive order makes me the Chief Information Security Officer for the Department of Information Technology as well. So my role is interesting because it does touch every single state agency. So what that means is where you wouldn't traditionally think a state government would have much in the way of operational technology, you have traffic control devices and a whole bunch of other things that don't fall into the traditional IT space. And I hope to be able to share some perspective about that, kind of what I've seen before the 2 years I've been with the state, kind of the trends I'm seeing related to OT as it relates to state government.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes, we'll definitely come back around to that and talk about what that means in terms of government with the ICSOT. Actually, what I'd like to do now is go ahead and get started with some of the questions. And I also welcome questions from the audience as well. If you don't mind, I would be happy if you put those in chat. We're going to go through a series of questions with the panelists, and then we're going to go ahead and I'll go ahead and take questions from the chat as well, probably the last half hour, 20 minutes of this, so that we're able to get any kind of burning issues out of your soul that you want to discuss or ask of our panelists. So the first thing I'm going to go ahead and address the panel with is this question. With the recent digitization of manufacturing, which is Industry 4.0 or Industry 5.0 even, it has transformed the landscape of the manufacturing industry with the adoption of computers, automation, enhanced with smart and autonomous systems, and it's all fed by data. So we're all interconnected, which is great. What does the digitization mean for cybersecurity in the manufacturing industry? And I would prefer if a couple of you would be more than happy to chat about this. Rob, I'm going to start with you first, sir, if you don't mind.
Sure thing. Yeah, generally speaking, our industrial networks have been connected up for a heck of a lot longer than people have realized. You've had integrators, maintenance personnel, original equipment manufacturers, et cetera, needing access for quite some time. As Jason noted, especially in the pandemic, we saw a lot of people really connecting up as well, and that connection is not going away. That whole digital transformation, Industry 4.0 kind of discussion is really, really important to companies to be able to stay competitive in the world landscape, especially for manufacturers where pennies can make a huge difference in the margins. So definitely a lot of pressure to constantly leaning into this. The place we need to be extremely careful is the business just needs to understand the true cost of ownership and the true cost of taking that journey. When I talk to most CEOs and boards, none of them are confused about where they generate revenue. And it's on the automation side of the house, not the IT side of the house. Both are important, but the automation side of the house is the one that usually gets less service and is the one that's more critical to the business. And so as they're starting to take those journeys, really, we're having those conversations at a board level to look at cybersecurity, not as a cost center, but really as the enablement to go and take that journey and be able to make that transformation. So there's a big shift in the executive level knowledge. Actually, I tend to see a better realization of the problem at the executive level than sometimes even do at the kind of the chief information security officer level or below, which is completely different than what it used to be. But it is on that OT topic. So for all the folks in the audience and anybody out there, it's really, really important to go get an understanding of your business because, again, we have a lot of skill sets to bring to bear, and that's amazing, but really have to understand what's the mission of this company. What are we trying to accomplish as a company? Then bring your security skills to bear. What we don't want to see is people taking their biases from the past lives or past networks or past missions and going, oh, okay, I'm going to copy and paste this into this company. Nope. Every IT security person once upon a time in their career walked into a manufacturing facility and said, oh my God, Windows XP. Like, stop. That's not necessarily the biggest issue. Better understand what we're trying to physically accomplish at that site, then figure out what are the risks to that site, then figure out the security, not start with what you think the security should be up front. So I just think it's an incredibly important time to do that. The adversaries have figured this out. My last comment, and I'll shut up here. We sort of mentioned in the pre-chat that some folks will throw out the words IT/OT convergence still. IT/OT convergence happened a decade plus ago. So and I'm glad we're using that digital transformation discussion instead, because we have Windows operating systems in the plant floor. We have for a long time. Heck, you can see a CP card on the side of an ABB controller with a Windows 7 card on it. So it's there. But now that we are hyper connected and our adversaries realize that, we are seeing not only an exponential increase in ransomware, but also a significant increase in intellectual property theft. Your intellectual property is not just in manufacturing secrets, it's also in how did you make a really good manufacturing environment. It's the physical process and control automation itself that ends up being really good intellectual property. So interesting times for sure.
Definitely. That was actually really amazing. Yeah. And you think about that, and I'm going to come around to you again about how I think it's interesting that you noted that these systems are already embedded into the manufacturing. It's not new. You're right. You're going to see a Windows 7 card. That's not something new. And I think it's that evolution that we're seeing. And you're right with that hyperconnectivity. And we're moving from that industry 4.0 to that industry 5.0. And it's just a continual process. It's not anything that's new. It's been involved. But now people are really realizing the impact of the security and what it's going to be and how to design the network. So interesting. Thank you, Rob. Very cool. Tim, do you want to go ahead and take a shot at that as well? We just want to talk about, what does this digitization for cybersecurity, or what does it mean for cybersecurity within this manufacturing industry? And I know that you have a vast amount of experience in this as well.
Absolutely, Kimberly. Just to follow up on Rob, like you said, number one is risk assessment of organization and looking at it holistically from top down. What does that really mean, though? We, again, see a lot of government systems. So we see a lot more less cutting edge or antiquated type systems that are currently being modernized out there. We work a lot with hydroelectric infrastructure, for instance, of the U.S. and provide some assessments there, as well as the nuclear industry. So these are super critical systems and life-saving systems in some cases out there. And one of the things that we know that there's a huge cultural gap. You'll have your IT and OT systems. Usually they'll be completely segregated and they don't know what each other's systems are doing. So there's no flow of information east to west or north to south between the divergent teams out there. And they're even monitored by different security operations centers in some cases. So you'll have your OT control room that's specifically just completely isolated, and then you'll have your IT enterprise systems around that. Typically your skill sets are deficient as well. Your IT people will, they're more apt to go just pull the plug on systems, where in OT environments, or in some cases like nuclear reactors, for instance, or even hydroelectric dams, you just can't turn the darn thing off if it's been compromised. You have to fall back to more manual processes, and of course, integrate the manual processes with that of the digital systems, because digital systems can be compromised, and visualizations and things that are occurring in your operations room could be manipulated. So again, I'd say incorporating a series of manual processes to ensure that the systems and the measurement and instrumentation are in parity with that of the greater digital systems out there, in addition to making us a little bit smarter, integrating our teams together a little bit better, and then holistically looking at risk management. Right now, the government is undergoing a huge awakening with integrating cybersecurity at all levels. So instead of just having little stovepipes or teams or applications or systems individually looked at, now they're integrating it at the agency level and creating a lot more efficiency for their teams as the cybersecurity layers go from sort of strategic into more tactical delivery of systems out there. And I think that's a great thing for the manufacturing industry to start to emulate, right? But like Rob said, it's all about dollars and cents at the end of the day. And I'm sure we'll come back around to it, but there's also a supply chain issue that we'll talk a little bit more, I think, as we move on to.
Yes, excellent. Thank you so much, Tim. And actually, I'm going to piggyback on what you had said. And it's interesting because you're both giving me perspectives from the commercial environment, you're right, because it does come down to money, because it comes down to a business, it comes down to business continuation, et cetera, and also a profit, right? Because we want to show profitability, we want your stakeholders to be comfortable. So I'm going to actually shift over to Jason and Chip as well, just to put you both on board here. And I wanted to talk about that governmental aspect from, and actually we'll start with Jason, because Jason, you're from the Fed, whereas Chip is more from the state. And then, but just talk about this digitization in cybersecurity manufacturing. So can you go ahead and share your thoughts with us, Jason, on that from CISA?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, whether I mean, for all commercial companies, it's going to come down to profit, right? They're out there to make money, and but also a lot of times they're providing a critical service too. So a lot of at least within this country, a lot of the critical infrastructure are private organizations, and even if they're state run, they're a lot of times outsourced. So one thing that I would just reiterate from what Rob said is taking a risk-based approach. So all the decisions that these organizations are making, and whether they're a government organization or a private organization, it comes down to what's their risk appetite. So when I meet with critical infrastructure organizations, first step is they need to really understand their entire environment. So as these organizations are adopting more advanced technology, these autonomous systems, machine learning, they're purchasing a lot of vendor supplied equipment. The more complex their systems are, the more difficult they are to defend. So that's one thing that I've seen a lot of times is these organizations, they've purchased a lot of these cutting edge technologies so that they can have a higher output or reduce some of their margins. But at the same time, their entire ecosystem is becoming more complex, and they don't have as easy of a way to look at all of their internal, like, incoming and outgoing traffic. They don't have the ability to kind of see the logs of all of their systems. So every time that they're making a purchasing decision or making a business decision, they have to consider the cost of cybersecurity. And one thing I've heard a lot over the last 6 months from these organizations, they used to have cybersecurity insurance. It was a line item. That cost has gone up hundreds of % for a lot of these smaller organizations, and they don't know how to deal with it. And so that's a big challenge for a lot of these organizations as well. So taking that risk-based approach so they can make trade-off decisions is really important. And my last little anecdote that I'll end with is an example I give to organizations when I talk about taking a risk-based approach, and they're kind of like, well, how do I start? Or it seems daunting to them, especially the smaller organizations. I give an example of, I replaced my HVAC not that long ago. It had the option of connecting to the internet, so I can control my temperature in my house from anywhere in the world. I took the risk-based approach of never connecting my HVAC to the internet, because the convenience of being able to control my temperature in my house from outside of my house isn't worth the additional headache and time I'm going to have to spend making sure that it's updated to the latest software version and all those types of things. So that's a small example that I like to give to critical infrastructure organizations of risk-based approach. Sometimes the convenience isn't worth the additional overhead and risk that you're opening yourself up to.
Excellent, Jason. That's perfect, and you actually made me think about that. That's why I don't have certain things connected in my house either. I'm a little gun shy. I don't know if we're just paranoid because we're in cybersecurity and it's just our nature. You know, I'm scared when I don't really want Alexa or Google or somebody, you know, listening into everything I say. So, you know, they might repeat it. I don't know. But yeah, that's an excellent example. And you actually hark back to what Rob had said too earlier about having understanding your environment to begin with. And I think that's one of the first steps that companies need to think about is, what do I have? Kind of take an assessment of what you know, what's going on, what am I working with, you know, because you're working with companies that are probably already established, right? You're not really looking at building something new, you know, including secure by design. That sounds great, but you know, we can't necessarily do that. So we have to kind of start with where we are and then move forward. So that was excellent. Thank you. We're definitely going to come back to some of those points as well. Chip, would you like to give us your thoughts in terms of the state, because that I would love to hear as well. So
yeah, absolutely. And the thing I'll likely echo kind of what a bunch of the panelists have already said, which is what you're really talking about is organizational change. You no longer have the traditional IT teams in their silo and the OT teams in their silo. As this comes together, you need to have the CISO be more involved with the folks that run OT, which is typically a COO or a business division lead that is an OT responsible organization. And I think that is one of the big shifts that needs to happen. I think one of the other pieces is ensuring that the IT teams are prepared to respond to cyber OT incidents. So again, organizational shift around incident response. I suspect that most cyber responders are not well equipped to handle an OT type incident. So I think that that's another kind of shift in the industry that we're seeing.
I get it. Yeah, that's a cultural shift, I think, definitely, that we're seeing. And actually, I was going to come back to that, but let me go ahead and have Aaron chime in. Now, Aaron, I know that this is that you are coming from a different perspective than the other four panelists, and you're looking at it. But what are your thoughts on this for the digitization? Because you've been through this recently, and if you want to talk about that a little bit, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So a couple things, and it was very interesting to listen to the other panelists talk. When we start talking about, I'll say different industries than my own, right? For definitely, it's oftentimes it's about where this digitalization is driven by margin or productivity or what have you. Mine is right now. It's actually it's more than anything a function of the kind of high-tech nature of what we're doing in terms of growing cells for treating patients' cancer. What we need in terms of requirements from the FDA to gather data, the way that our systems are set up, and a lot of it is. So I come from that perspective. What I'll say is the facility we're building. Maybe I should give a little bit of context for people so they understand. The products we make are autologous cell therapy. So we take patient cells from someone who has cancer, bring them back to our facility, we modify them, test, release, send them back to the hospital, and infuse them into the patient. So literally, we're talking about life and death, and I don't use those terms loosely. I mean it very sincerely. These are people, especially at this stage of the development of our products, they're relapsed or refractory to other treatments. They've been through multiple rounds of other treatments, and they're kind of at the end of their rope. So for the design of our facility, in every way we considered it, the resilience and redundancy of our systems was absolutely paramount. I could not afford to have a facility at scale making hundreds of patients, patient batches at a time, and lose power, for example. There are design things that we put in place to assure that after doing our FMEAs and all of our risk assessments, that we decided to make some design decisions. Cyber was just another thing for us to consider. Just as all the other panelists said, we knew that we were kind of over leveraged. If we had a ransomware attack, for example, we'd be talking about minutes, maybe hours of response time before we got it resolved, before it started to affect people's lives. So we wanted to make sure that we designed some protection in from the beginning. So I think that to me, it comes from a different that different end, but it's all the same. It's about those risk assessments. But as I said, in our case, it came from more resiliency than the pure always looking at it from just from the cybersecurity side. So we've done this in almost every domain you can think of, and when it comes down to resiliency and redundancy of the facility systems, organization, operations. And then because of the hyperconnectivity of our systems, we need to worry about adversaries coming after us.
Wonderful. And that whole journey that you went through, so you were already an existing company, and then you went back, and I know you worked with Rob, or you worked with Dragos, and
yep.
You implemented this. So I'm going to kind of shift this just a little bit, because the next thing we were going to really talk about was that integration between the ITs and the OT systems, or those two pieces, and all of you addressed that at some point in your comments, and I think that's very interesting that people don't realize that there are two separate systems, and they really do need to collaborate, work together in order for security to really be effective. And in doing that, I know, Rob, like I said, you were working with Dragos with that, and I was wondering if you could, when you come into a company, and we have manufacturers obviously on the line here, this is who our audience is today, what does that look like when you come in and you kind of do this this session, this assessment, you look, you figure out what the mission is, but how do you really address that friction that kind of goes on between those two pieces, the IT and the OT? So if you would share some thoughts on that, that would be great.
Yeah. So, I mean, regardless of specific clients, just looking at, just looking at working with clients, obviously our firm, again, is more of a tech firm and deploying technology for folks to get those insights. But a lot of it starts with an assessment. And without just rattling off a bunch of different services, what I'll say is that the most important thing, again, is to understand kind of what Tim was talking about, just what's the overall understanding of risk here. And that generally for me starts with scenarios. You can take it a bunch of different ways. You can do whatever you want. But for me, if I'm the CEO of a manufacturing company, my big ask is not how do we protect against the unknowns and all this other crap. My thing is like, what do we know is realistic? And what do we need to be ready for? And so if you're a manufacturing facility in the United States, as an example, and you haven't planned for a ransomware scenario across your operations environment, had a tabletop exercise to include the executive level, like you're way behind. There's a lot of stuff you can do, but there's a couple things that if you don't do, your congressional hearing is going to suck, right? And so we start with those of like, what is it really that you need to be prepared for? If you're an electric power company and you haven't prepared for a 2015 or 2016 Ukraine cyber attack and electric system scenario, you're behind, right? So it's those kinds of things. And what I like about that is it gets alignment at the executive level pretty quickly. And then all of the IT, OT friction stuff that you usually hear about goes away pretty quickly. As long as you're not coming in with, again, those biases of I'm here to patch your servers, like, whoa, stop. Like that's not what we're talking about. But as long as you don't come in guns blazing and you actually get an executive alignment of what you're trying to solve for and there's resources behind it, there's usually not a lot of drama between the teams. They all just want to make their company more secure, especially when you're talking about like what Aaron is talking about, life and death scenarios. A lot of people in infrastructure, I mean, whether you're talking manufacturing, electric, whatever, they work and serve in the communities they live in, and they're just trying to make them better. So scenarios are the first one. Then I would say if you're just going to go down the list of like services you should do, again, get an incident response retainer in place. No company is really staffing all those experts, especially on the operations side of the house. You need to have somebody to call and be ready to do so. And then after that, it's kind of what you hit on. What do we even have? Kind of what's the architecture look like here? Because you'll usually find that there are some things native in the environment that you can do without spending any money to go ahead and raise the security posture. There's some small, easy wins. Like if you have Active Directory connecting up your IT to your OT, that's the highway of death that ransomware is going to drive down. So, go ahead and separate that out. Like there's fundamental architecture changes that can get you in a really good place. And then once you get through that, then it's how can I start figuring out what the use cases of those scenarios are. So if I just throw a bunch of alerts and logs in front of a security analyst, they're not really going to know where to focus no matter how good the tech is. But if you're saying, hey, here's the types of scenarios we're concerned with, then they can say, oh, well, here's the combination of events or the type of data that I would need to be able to answer those questions. Or, hey, if this is what the board has to report on from an incident response, here's the type of data we're going to need. And I'll drive that point home real quick and then pass on, which is, again, not to pick on Aaron here, but I think his perspective is really, really useful, where you're talking about life and death scenarios. Well, there's going to be FDA discussions. There's going to be regulatory discussions. There's going to be liability discussions. No matter if he's the victim or not, his company goes down, he's getting sued, I promise you. So the discussion, not that I'm trying to wish that on you, Aaron, but the discussion then should be at a general counsel, chief risk officer, CEO level of, what are the things we're going to have to be able to show, prove, and talk about? And that should then drive, well, what logs and data do we need in the security team to be able to answer those things? Because in the world of IT, you can kind of walk in to any modern day enterprise network and kind of get through an incident response. It's better to prepare, but you can get through. On the operations side of the house, if you didn't prepare ahead of time, you're pretty much screwed. And so you really got to get that down to pat.
That's fascinating. I mean, that is on point, because really it's the prepared nature. And I mean, I think looking at what's going on right now in terms of Ukraine and whatnot, I mean, how many of those places are prepared to take on or to have that instant response? I mean, that's just,
Just to hit on that very briefly, like I've really liked, I think, I'm not just paying credit to CISA because Jason's on the call. I think anybody that knows me knows I'm equally critical as well as complimentary when it's owed. And CISA has been nailing the communications out to the community about shields up and all this. One thing I'll note, though, which is not a critique of how they're doing it, because I think they've done it very, very well, is all the companies that are hearing this and going, oh, we should start doing security in operations environments. Time's up. Like, no. If you haven't been listening for the last couple of years and you see a CISA bulletin, you go, oh, we should buy a firewall and stuff now, like, game over. Don't even worry about it. Just get the incident response retainer. But if you've been doing all the security work, then you can do the things we're talking about. And if not, prepare for the next crisis. But there's nothing in a 2-month window that you're doing inside of an ICS network.
That's interesting. Okay. So that's good advice. Jason, did you want to comment on that as well, since he kind of threw the ball in your direction? I mean, I know we're talking about, like I said earlier, that we would bring in this whole, I think the current situation with Ukraine is extremely important, extremely timely. So do you have any comments to that as well?
Sure. Yeah, I'll touch on that, and then I'll touch on kind of the approach we take with the assessments too for those critical infrastructure organizations. But yeah, as Rob said, we've been putting out guidance since the beginning of January, warning organizations that, hey, geopolitical tensions, it's getting contentious. We've seen this before with Russia, when a lot of times 5 years ago, there's overflow of their cyber attacks, whether they're targeting Ukraine or whoever's being targeted. It's going to overflow any connected devices. You're likely going to be impacted. And now with the sanctions that we've seen over the last couple of weeks that the U.S. and other countries have imposed on Russia, we're just warning organizations to be prepared. The number of ransomware incidents, the number of attacks that we may see could go up just because of those organizations that are carrying out those attacks. It could start spiraling out of control based on what we're seeing in the news lately. So we're just warning everybody to, keep your guards up, monitor your logs on a regular basis, and lower your threshold of reporting to CISA, FBI, your local organizations. So we're telling everybody, if you see something suspicious, report it to us, report it to CISA, report it to FBI, report it to your local, any regulatory authorities. You're required to, just so that we have visibility and we can kind of deconflict. We're putting out almost daily new situational awareness bulletins and advisory reports, and we really use all that information that's coming in through these reports to be able to put those out, identify how large spread some of these attacks really are. And then the last thing too is, a lot of times the first people that are going to see attacks are not CISA, right? A lot of times it's going to come from a report from a small organization or a niche organization that's reporting it to us, FBI, when they're seeing it and being vigilant in their reporting and information sharing. But just to go back real quick, so to touch on kind of the approach from a consulting perspective when we're meeting with critical infrastructure organizations, the way and CISA has a number of different engagements. So what the primary engagement I use when I'm meeting with a critical manufacturing organization or life-sustaining critical infrastructure organization is a cyber resilience review, and our focus really is on a critical service. So we pick one critical service that the organization is responsible for providing, right? So a lot of these organizations are very complex. They might be manufacturing a lot of different products, but we pick one critical service. What's the most critical service? And then we do a cyber assessment based on that critical service and what's required to sustain that service, right? So in the event of a major ransomware or cyber attack, can the organization still deliver that critical service? If they unplug their network, can they fail over to manual processes? We're focused more on that organization being able to continue to operate, whether or not they can, whether they're using technology or not. If they're operating, continuing to deliver that critical service. If it's an energy company that can continue to provide power, if it's a water company that can continue to provide water while they're under cyber attack, that's really what our focus is. And we have a methodology that we use to kind of walk organizations through evaluating that critical service and evaluating their resiliency to a cyber attack.
Excellent. And I think that's really, you mentioned some things that, also the reporting aspect. I think that's extremely important, because people think, well, I was attacked, it's going to affect me. I think it's worse if you don't report the incident. If you report it, then at least we can address it. And I think that that's something that CISA is definitely pushing along with other organizations to go ahead and report the incidences. That way we're able to go ahead and do any mitigation or whatnot so that we can better the security posture overall.
Just
So
to note, because there's a lot of like tech people on this call. In terms of reporting incidents to the government, not trying to tell people not to, but please talk to your lawyer and your general counsel before just listening to this webcast.
No, I think that's great. No, Rob, thank you. No, that's fabulous. I mean, you guys know what's going on within the industry in terms of that. And I think that Rob brings up a very good point, because now I think legalities are so important within our industry. And, you know, you just look at the cyber insurance, you look at the cyber laws, everything has changed, right? I mean, 20 years ago or, you know, 30 years ago, it didn't exist, you know, and now this is something that's much more prevalent. So yes, I think having legal counsel is extremely important to have. I'm going to shift a little bit in the same vein. And Tim, I'm going to talk to you because we wanted to talk about the supply chain management for manufacturing, because honestly, you know, how do we handle these security aspects? Because Leslie said, we've got this whole thing with Ukraine going on. We've got, you know, this is just, it's new, it popped up, it's recent, temporary, but you know, supply chain issues have been around for a while, but now I think it's become definitely much more prevalent. So would you go ahead and kind of talk about the supply chain issues and the security aspects and what we're doing?
Absolutely, Kimberly. So this actually goes way back for me as well. So I was a technical director at Cyber Command for several years, from between 2012 to 2017, and you know, I've also served as a threat actor as well. So I've been on the other side of the fence, doing red teaming activities, as well as you know, cyber activities that will be advantageous to us in times of war. But so that gives me a little bit of a perspective on the supply chain out there, because looking around at major attacks that have occurred most recently, if you take a look at the Orion solar winds, or even if you go back and look at the Stuxnet attack, they all have roots in a lot of different areas, starting with tainting the supply chain way far up. So it could be as simple as, for instance, your janitorial services could be infiltrated by an adversary or a nation state, and then they can put agents directly within your facilities, and then that's game over, right, at that point there. So, yeah, even something as benign as looking at the people with whom is supplying you, your trucking services, your transportation, logistics, arms, how are they defending themselves? You know, even just again, with janitorial, the people typically have access to super sensitive areas, but yet everybody overlooks them because they're the lowest skill set out there professionally, right? For organizations, i.e. not integral to the criticality of the organization overall, but they have direct access to probably the most sensitive areas out there. I would also state to low-hanging fruit, like executive assistants and other people with whom have access to executive level emails. So if you take a look at the Sony hacks, for instance, you know, social engineering to the lowest common denominator of skill set led to large scale compromise and embarrassment of an entire organization. And even in the first, you know, for the first time in history, movies were not released because of threats from other nation states. That was pretty interesting, I thought, out there. But also, just going back to my Cyber Command roots, Cyber Command established a organization or a facility, I should say, out here in Maryland, Columbia, Maryland, called Dreamport. And one of the things that Dreamport is doing is it's taking a look at the manufacturing community, specifically in SCADA, ICS, and they're trying to say, okay, well, if we're going to give advice to the community overall, and we're going to, you know, defend the nation and try to give outreach to everybody out there and show them what right looks like, what do we need to do first? We need to take a look at all these PLCs. We need to take a look at these technologies, these MLs, these cloud connected systems, and where are they actually going? What data is actually going back and forth, and understanding that. And I think that goes back to what Rob said. You don't have to kind of do this in-house unless you're a massive organization, like a multi-billion-dollar manufacturing corporation that this kind of stuff, you know, hinges on. I know organizations like Monsanto, for instance, as we're the first to implement threat intelligence and direct security operations to their operation to basically safeguard their GMOs that were under siege by hacktivists and people who disagree with their stances out there, right? So, I mean, there are some organizations that can afford to implement some sort of research and development into what they're putting internal to their systems, because if you get a piece of hardware that essentially is cloud connected to a less secure portion of the supply chain, and that is receiving automated updates, and that supply chain is tainted upstream, as in the Orion hacks out there, where In this case, the SolarWinds certificates were compromised, and they were able to essentially inject updates to the system with impunity. Nobody was none the wiser for a very long time because it looked like it was a legitimate activity coming through. Again, it's a direct supply chain attack. So, going back to risk adversity, right? Things like insurance, for instance. That's the first thing that most people do. I'll just buy insurance, and that's how I'm going to hedge my risk to my organization. I will definitely tell you, 5 years ago, the insurance industry was all in on giving people cyber insurance. But cyber insurance is something now that you'll get. But number one, before you even and we deal with this constantly because people come to us during the incident response process. That's typically when they become customers of ours. So, first thing we tell them, get a public affairs person and get a lawyer before you even talk to your own insurance company, because they're going to look for ways to determine whether you're at risk or at fault for allowing the situation to happen and therefore not cover you. So all the premiums you paid mean nothing. In addition to that, once you burn that bridge, it's literally a burnt bridge. You're SR22 as far as the insurance industry is concerned. Nobody's going to touch you outside of the Lloyd's of London or other very high risk crowdsourced programs that are stupidly expensive to be able to do that. So I would say by implementing, again, a good risk, assessing. So in our company, we have a mantra. We call it assess, monitor, defend, right? Number one is assess the organization, establish good governance, understand who your supply chain is, understand what's coming in and out of your systems, fuse the good threat intelligence, i.e. monitor, work with your external agencies. Jason out there with CISA is basically stating, hey, we're open for business over here, guys. We're giving you guys threat intelligence. We're telling you who the threat actors are. We're compiling these detailed manifestos and portfolios of threat actors that will be industry vertical specific. These are things that you guys need to take a look at and fuse into your defensive posture and understand that you don't have to defend against all, your castle doesn't have to be defended against every possible scenario, but mostly the most likely scenarios, like Rob stated. If you're a power grid, take a look at the Ukraine power attacks. If you're a financial system, take a look at the Latvia or Eastern Bloc countries that had their financial systems wrecked and ruined, by suspected threat actors, right? So I think that's pretty much where I stand without going too much farther down the rabbit hole and dominating the time here. But thank you very much.
No, Tim, we definitely appreciate that. I think that's a really important aspect. And we actually discussed that at some of our other meetings about the supply chain. Does anybody else want to add anything in there that they feel would be any of their thoughts on the supply chain at this point? I figured I'd put that out there. So, okay, that was.
Well, look, just brief on supply chain. A lot of people talk about supply chain and mean a whole lot of different things. I think the way the panelists are talking about it is spot on, but just be really careful of the hype out there. I remember Bloomberg had an article not too long ago about the super micro chips and all that, and it was complete trash. So just your supply chain issues are not hidden back doors inside of hardware from China. Your supply chain issues are availability, it's interconnectivity, it's sourcing things off of eBay that you should be buying from a legitimate provider. It's those supply chain issues. Solve those before you start putting every JTAG under a microscope.
Very nice. Good advice. Good advice. Excellent. Excellent. Well, I know we're coming down. We've got about 10 minutes left or so to directly just speak with this panel before we move on to anything that the audience has asked us. So I'm going to actually go back around and I'm going to probably address Aaron and Chip with this one. So, manufacturers that are beginning their cyber journey, what are a few good points or things to consider? Because I'm looking at the audience we have here, and they're saying, okay, I'm really interested in integrating cybersecurity, or I feel like maybe we're not quite there where we should be with our security posture. So Aaron, I know you've been through this recently. What are your thoughts on that? Or how did you end up deciding to get to that point?
In our case, as I said, I mean, Rob kind of joked about it, but I want to be able to sleep at night and I want to be able to treat patients. So anything I can do to make sure that happens in kind of any domain is important to me. So I guess the first thing is to assume you're a target. Which is kind of important because that from a threat model perspective that'll drive some action. The other is call people who know what they're doing in this case. But I think what we did is just like I was talking about all the kind of hardening we were doing on the physical plant, so to speak, based on risk assessments, we did the same thing. So yeah, we hired the team from Dragos. They did a crown jewel analysis and a network assessment we joked it was effectively like they were auditing us, but it wasn't, it's not like we had a system in place. and that helped drive design decisions on things that we could do better. So kind of build in some best practices from the beginning. And as we get closer to actually building, in manufacturing, we'll continue down that journey of making sure that, incident response and monitoring and all those things that we'll need. But it started by getting that understanding the network architecture, understanding how we intend systems to talk to one another, and what we can do is, as Rob kind of alluded to earlier, about make it a little bit better. Doesn't make it make it perfect, but it made it a lot better. And we know what we were trying to protect. So that, I think that's, to me, those are the really important things that I would say to any manufacturer. But I think the one thing I can say is you can't do nothing, right? I think this is the key. Rob talked about it in terms of there's liability, just pure liability. There's ethical, moral considerations depending on what your industry is, et cetera. You have to do something, and you have to. This is Rob. You made the point earlier about scenario planning, which is great, but I think the only limitation has always been is people only scenario plan for those things that they think are reasonable or likely, and you're absolutely right that there has been a sea change in that perspective for manufacturers in recent years. Or if there's definitely a sea change, but there are still people out there that don't see it. You have to consider it. It is in towards the gross negligence category if you don't. Make a call to someone, consider it, think about what you would do, and they'll help you through it. It's the way I would put it.
Excellent. Thank you for that viewpoint, Aaron, too, because it is really interesting to see how companies decide what, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and I want to, I want to employ this cybersecurity model. I want to go ahead and really, be serious about this. So thank you, Aaron.
The one thing I'll just add, I think we were talking about, 5 years ago, Ukraine, et cetera. And insurance, the Merck had a major cybersecurity issue, 1.7 billion, et cetera, and change, stop production, et cetera, back in 2017. And just luckily for them, I guess, won a case against their insurer because it was not an active war. So, but once that happened, I can say, having been in this industry for a long time, and through that event, everybody's ears picked up. Kind of like, wait a second, how did that happen? And so yes, again, as I said, moral and ethical side to the pharmaceutical and biotech side of the house. So more people have started to realize it's important. But yeah, just don't do it. Don't do nothing. That's kind of a problem to do.
Thank you. That's really good advice. Yeah, do something, be active in some way, engage. Don't be proactive, not reactive. And I think, as Rob had said earlier, if you're coming to them and you're already, don't think that we're going to go ahead and solve everything in the next 2 months. That way you're never going to be attacked. It has to be something that, you can put in place and prep for the next attack or for the next incident that comes up. But, this is really something you need to prepare for. And Chip, I'm going to go ahead and pick on you a little bit here, because you're looking at it from the state, and of course, being the assistant for the state. What does the ICSOT look like from the state point of view as far as cybersecurity is concerned? What do you, I know we talk about supply chain, we talk about a variety of different things. So what does that look like for you, do you think, from the state point of view? So
I do want to reiterate that I think many of the points that have been raised already are phenomenal. Doing a risk assessment, figuring out the things that are most dangerous to you right now. Doing long-term planning isn't necessary if you have something that's going to kill you today. So I think focusing on that initial risk assessment to say, where are my biggest challenges?
Right.
And it's not that we have a Windows XP embedded system. It's things like, hey, have we done adequate physical controls around our externally exposed assets?
Right.
So highways are a great example. There's OT all along the highways. Have we implemented good physical security around those? Do we have tamper detection and tamper prevention so that we can tell if somebody's messing with something? Because if you don't have that, and I think that's applicable across manufacturing and industry as well, when you have something externally exposed where it's not kind of inside of your boundary, I think you have those same challenges. So I think that's what I would really, if I pick two things, the third thing would be really trying to segment IT and OT and treat that as a boundary, as a system boundary. Make sure that those things can't talk to each other in ways that are unexpected. And I think it's a foundational thing. I think most of the traditional IT folks get it, but I don't think that they get it when it comes to segmenting OT in the same way that they would segmenting a DMZ from your internal network.
Interesting. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you so much for those thoughts. I appreciate that, Chip. At this point, I'm going to actually give our 5 panelists a break here, and I'm going to actually turn it over to Mike Kelleher. He is the Executive Director for the Maryland MEP, the Maryland Manufacturer Extension Partnership, and they're a wonderful organization that supports our manufacturing in Maryland. And Mike, I believe there was a couple of things you wanted to share with us, initiatives that you're working on, and then I'm actually going to go back to our panelists. Like I said, give them a break. There are some questions in the chat that I think that want to be addressed, and of course, then their final thoughts as well. So, Mike, I'd be thrilled if you would share with us what's going on.
Sure. Thanks, Kimberly, and thanks for having me on today. I think the information from the panelists is all really spot on, and I think it's great for the manufacturers of any size to take even a little bit of the advice or a little bit of the information that's been provided and just take that first step to start to protect their businesses. As Kimberly shared, I'm the executive director of the Maryland MEP, which is the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. We're actually a nonprofit here in Maryland that works very closely with the state of Maryland Commerce Department, as well as with the federal Commerce Department, to bring solutions out to not only manufacturers, but all defense contractors within the state of Maryland. And a couple of programs that I just wanted to highlight and share because they have really good resources for companies to take advantage of. The first is our DCAP program, which is the Defense Cybersecurity Assistance Program. And it's a program that Maryland MEP and Commerce have jointly put forth over the last 4 or 5 years through funding from the Department of Defense to help any defense contractor comply with the cybersecurity requirements of the DFARS and the NIST 800-171 and now the CMMC program. And it really is a good resource because it provides funding to help offset the cost of assessing the issues and challenges, but also funding to help mitigate and fix the issues that are identified through that process. And as I said, it's a program that's been around for quite a few years. We've assessed nearly 200 companies through that program and provided assistance, over $1 million of assistance directly to those companies to fix and mitigate those issues. And so for us as the MEP, we really see it as a good platform to start to bring some of this knowledge together. I think one of the gentlemen on the panel shared just knowing what some of the good resources are and who some of the good providers are can really be overwhelming and difficult, particularly for the small companies. And so through this program, we've built out a team of Maryland-based cybersecurity providers and experts that are actually out working in the field and working with these manufacturers and defense contractors to improve their business. And so there's a lot of lessons learned that can be shared from that. And that is a program that we have leveraged to turn into now a broader manufacturing cybersecurity assistance program, really taking these lessons from the defense sector out to all manufacturers. Obviously, when based on what we've heard today, and when you look at what's going on in the world, cybersecurity is critical for all the manufacturers, regardless of what products or services they're making. So getting our manufacturing community here in Maryland to pay attention to these things is becoming ever more critical. Just as they start to look to protect their data, their IP, their financial investments, but also their machines and equipment and the safety of their workers and the end user and the end customer. So that manufacturing cybersecurity assistance program is something that will include a training component, training for your workers, training, general education training, as well as improving the cybersecurity posture of the organization, as well as following that assessment and mitigation process that we've developed through the defense side. And then lastly, I was glad to hear the discussion around supply chain come up because more and more our industrial base here, our supply chain base here is really so tightly integrated into so many different verticals and so many different industries. And so having suppliers that are strong and healthy and able to be resilient to all sorts of risks and threats to their organizations is critical to the viability of Maryland's manufacturing community. And we have a supply chain resiliency program that we're delivering in partnership with Commerce again. And that's also through some federal funding that was made available. And that program provides direct funding to help companies improve their supply chain posture, right? So they can address open issues, whether it be with their existing suppliers or improving their posture with their customer base to make them a stronger, healthier supplier. So there's a lot of resources out there. It's actually a pretty good time to be a Maryland manufacturer. The state and the federal partners are all coming together, and at Maryland MEP, we try to be the convener of this information and help bring those solutions out to the manufacturing sector. So if you have any questions on any of those, feel free to check out our website or reach out to Kim and she can get you my contact information. We're always happy to talk to any of our companies that are here. So try to keep it brief, Kim.
No, that was perfect. No, you've got time. That's why I made it the way I did. So thank you so much, Mike. That was absolutely fabulous. And actually, I'm going to ask you if you don't mind putting the website or your information in the chat. That way everybody can see the chat, and that way we're able to communicate that way. I mean, I'm going to make that same extension to, or extend that to everybody, all the panelists. If they feel that they'd like to share any kind of information with everybody in chat, please do so. But I am going to turn my attention to that. There are 2 questions in chat so far from our audience, and I'd like to go ahead and start addressing them. And with my panelists, whoever feels like they would like to jump in first with those, please be my guest. The first one is from Alan Ma, and he writes, how would an independent cyber assessment based on NIST SP 853 revision 5 help identify potential security gaps in ICS environments? And then he says, what recommendations would you suggest? So really that's a 2-part question. And I don't know if anybody's ever read through here that is on this call besides me to the panelists, that NIST 800-53. It is an exciting read. If you ever want to sleep at night, I suggest you read it before you, if you would like to get tired, but just saying that. Tim, looks like you are first up on deck. Would you like to go ahead and respond to that, please?
Kimberly, absolutely. So this is my bread and butter. So governance is a huge area that we have competency in, and we also serve as a third-party auditing organization on the behalf of the Pentagon, as well as NIST and FedRAMP for cloud services out there. And so one of the things that I could definitely state is that I think regulatory frameworks are great. I think NIST 853 is really targeted and designed for federal information systems out there, and there are some other good alternatives. So for instance, if you are part of the power generation system out there, NRECA, the National Regional Electrical Cooperative Organization, has actually created a cybersecurity framework similar to what we would call a NIST 800-171. So if you take a look at NIST 800-171 under the NIST cycle out there, it's basically designed towards supply chain and supply chain risk assessing, if you will. And if you're an organization that deals with the federal government in any capacity, we see a lot of manufacturing companies right now, specifically additive and subtractive manufacturing companies, coming into work with either cooperative research agreements with the DoD or other systems out there. And NIST 800-171 is a requirement to do business with the federal civilian government. And now we have something called CMMC, which is a Cyber Maturity Model Certification, which is emerging through DoD. So where one is a voluntary accreditation to where you're sort of following the plan and implementing these best practices and doing these things to make yourself more resilient on the cyber side of the house. The DoD is imposed that you will have a certification at a specific level. CMMC 2.0 just came out back in November, which is a little bit of a reconfiguring of a variety of cyber frameworks. So we have something called the Defense Federal Acquisition Rule, which has got 17 base cybersecurity hygiene elements in it. And then we also have the NIST 800-171, 871 revision 2, which actually is a little bit different than 871, and another risk assessment framework kind of pulled into that one as well. So again, there's a lot of opportunity out there. I'd say, you know, number one, talk to an expert within the field. MEP is a great place to start if you're going to be trying to locate expertise in the field and just pair people together. And they have grant money, they have programs, they have all sorts of things out there that they can bring to bear as tools for you guys. Also, DHS, reach out to CISA. CISA is open for business, like I stated, and they give some great advice out there. They have an entire series of write-ups for how to take a look, risk assess, be resilient, incident response plans, all sorts of things that are canned that you can pull offline and start to integrate into your own program out there. So hopefully that's sort of what we want to take a look at for manufacturers, more NIST 800-171 if you're a civilian type manufacturer, especially if you do business with feds, or CMMC if you're going to do business with DoD at any point in time. Both are great cybersecurity frameworks. Only one requires an actual certification from a company like us, for instance.
Right, right. And I know that there are certain companies that actually with the CMMC that you have to go to, and you have to actually achieve that certification, right? You have to show that you're compliant in order to do business with as the government or whatnot. Correct, Tim?
That is correct. And so they call that, you know, in the government space, an authority to operate, or an ATO. It's issued on a triannual basis with an annual surveillance program. That's just a big fancy way to say you have to do it every 3 years. And somebody's going to come in at least once a year and take a look to make sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. So whatever organization that you retain to do your stuff, again, these are not going to be government entities that come in and do this. They're going to be organizations like us who are third-party auditing organizations. Actually, if you go to the CMMC accreditation board, cmmc-ab.org, they have a marketplace full of certified companies. Don't get fooled by snake oil and a bunch of other sites out there with the .coms at the end of it. Go take a look at that. I'll put it in the chat here for the CMMC accreditation board. It is the source of all knowledge if you're looking for an accreditation. Again, if you're looking just to implement cybersecurity hygiene, best practices, starting your governance journey with your organization, trying to fuse your enterprise and your ICS together or your operational systems together, then I would suggest more NIST 800-171 than any other cybersecurity program out there. I'll paste a couple of resources out here for those types of you know, what informations are protected and those programs and where can you go get those information so that people don't have to go Google around and not get to the right place.
Perfect. Thank you, Tim. Yes, I know. Sometimes I know you're just so desperately looking for something that you're just not sure, you know, what the appropriate resource would be. So if you guys, and this goes with all of you, please go ahead and put any kind of information in the chat. People are looking at the chat. They're asking me for your ways to contact you, you know, as a company or as an individual, because they're very interested in continuing, I think, some of these conversations that we're having. So I want to move on to Waverly Edwards. They also posted something up here. It says, there are many actions that should be taken by manufacturers. We all know that, right? Where do you think that a micro segmentation as well as inspecting firmware fall on the list of protections that should be employed by the enterprise? So Rob, you have got this. Please take it away.
Awesome. Yeah, look, in terms of segmentation, firewalls, things like that, absolutely, wherever you can employ it. Microsegmentation can be useful, but you kind of got to figure out where and how far. I think one of the big differences between IT and OT is you may have an enterprise IT network, but you've got a lot of OT networks. So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution depending on your risk portfolio. Inspecting firmware and things like that would probably be pretty bottom of the list for me. When I look at, again, kind of designing out a security program, do all the stuff we were talking about earlier, the scenarios, so forth, but it's kind of the outside-in view of how many sites do we have that are really critical. You may have, small manufacturers have smaller amounts, don't get me wrong. We work with some companies that have 1,000+ manufacturing facilities. Some of them, if they go down, the company is in big issue. Hell, for some of them, if they go down, the country is in a big issue. Yeah. There's some of them, though, if they go down, they can catch back up in 3 to 5 days. And so you're going to have a different risk kind of acceptance level with that. So figure out what are our important sites. Then, as Aaron was talking about, figure out the crown jewels in those sites. Then it's what is the security package start to end that makes sense for the scenarios we're trying to get around. You may find firmware analysis doesn't even fit into that. You might find that for some sites it does. But I'm more worried about TeamViewer on a human machine interface reaching out to the internet than I am about firmware-based attacks. So start with the things that are going to get you in trouble. Start with the things that are, again, a full security package, and then go from there. A real clean way to say that is there's prevention, detection, response, and recover, right? You've got to identify, but I'll roll that in. The whole point, though, is most people, most companies put everything or just about everything into prevention, leaving them no ability to detect and respond and recover. And they're not doing it inappropriately. If you look at those standards and frameworks and guidance that we're talking about, if you take a look at them, most of them are prevention based. We took a look at all the different NIST ones and so forth, and 62403, and about 95% of all the guidance is preventative focused. So if these companies largely take a prevention focus, it's not because they're not listening. It's oftentimes they are listening, but you need to go beyond the standards and frameworks and realize, how am I going to detect, respond, and recover to the things that matter to us? Put that security package in at your top class sites. In other words, if you've got 25% of your sites that are the most important to your business, do all the right security things at those 25%. Don't just peanut butter spread everything across your 100 sites. It doesn't make sense. It's completely appropriate for some small site. Maybe the only control they have is a firewall and an incident response retainer. It's just going to be a discussion based on what you're trying to solve for. But again, specific to the question, firmware analysis and so forth, and SBOMs and all that stuff, pretty low on the list. And zero trust, although I'm glad to hear the discussions in enterprise, does not apply in OT. It is impossible to have zero trust in OT. So just get off that topic.
Good advice. Perfect. You heard it first here. There you go. Get off the topic. Zero trust isn't there. So perfect. I'm actually going to, I'm going to come back to about the grants for small MBE cybersecurity startups. I'm coming back to that. But since we're on that same vein with the NIST and whatnot, I'm going to jump down to what Eric said. And he said, other than using NIST docs, are there any other sources of information for performing a cyber vulnerability assessment on OT systems? And I figured that was in the context of what we're discussing. So does anybody want to go ahead and address that besides NIST? I don't know if anybody else wants to go ahead and pick that up.
I think I'm just going to point back over to, and unless you're going by very industry specific things, like I said, NORECA is a great organization to where they have their own cybersecurity framework specifically against OT systems. It's great for me to take a look at. It takes a lot of or ambition, I should say, from the NIST series anyways. But I'm a big fan of a couple of different things. ISO is really huge in manufacturing. ISO 27001 or 27002, keep in mind, is a product level certification. If you want more of a qualitative management or technical management certification, qualitative management would be an ISO 9001 or a like 17000 20 or 21 series. That's what we had to undergo in order to be able to, be a certification accreditation body, if you will, or CAB as they call it out there. So those ISOs are pretty good. But again, ISO is site specific, meaning that if you do go down the ISO track, they're going to be very specific to your manufacturing site or your corporate headquarters. Those things do not transfer amongst the entire organization worldwide, right? So if you want something more holistic, take a look at that NIST series. 80171 is where I recommend to sort of start out at, because it's about supply chain and organizational level hygiene. And to be honest with you, it doesn't know any bounds. It doesn't apply to IT, it doesn't apply to OT, it applies to everything holistically. And if you are doing these specific things, you're going to have some great cybersecurity hygiene, building awareness, infusing threat intelligence, understanding where your systems are, and build a map, have documentation in place, have a plan, because it's not about if, it's always about when, and becoming very resilient. So going back to what Rob said, grab an organization, get them on retainer for incident response, and help them walk you through what does that process look like. Because if you got to pull that fire alarm, you want somebody familiar with your systems, not somebody coming in cold, which in our experience is taken sometimes days or weeks to pull things out of that organization because they just weren't ready to provide us with the things that we needed for incident response. And the damage gets deeper, greater, worse as you go along out there. So prep.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Yes. And especially with our current situation with the shields up and whatnot going on right now, definitely preparation is key. So I agree completely. Let's see. I wanted to go back and say, what grants are available for the small MBE cybersecurity startups? Do any of you have any kind of thoughts on any maybe grants that are available? I don't know. Maybe Mike, do you have any thoughts on that, or Jason, or and whatnot with the grants? If you do not, we can always come back to that, or we can answer stuff in chat if you don't have anything off the top of your head. Sure.
Yeah, so from our side, Kim, the grants and the funding is assistance for the companies, whether they're a manufacturer or defense contractor, not for the cyber provider.
Okay, that's no problem. That's no problem at all. I think that's just a great thing for them to know. If anybody has any thoughts on that, and they want to add it to the chat, please be my guest. That'd be fabulous. I know we're coming down to the last 15 minutes of this particular conversation that we're having. So I'd like to go around to each particular panelist and ask you for your final thoughts right now. Even if you want to share anything about, relate it back to the current situation, what's going on right now with Ukraine and whatnot, please feel free to do that. Or if it's just something in general that you think is beneficial to the cyber community in terms of ICSOT, we'd appreciate that. You know what? Let's see. Does anybody would like to go first? I will take a volunteer. Otherwise, I will volunteer you.
I'll go ahead and jump in.
Okay.
The point that Rob just made in chat, so his message in chat was also on frameworks. Take a look at IEC 62443, and then his whole point here is do security and map to the framework, not the other way around. Right. I think it's such an important thing. If you focus solely on using the framework to find problems, you're focusing on that compliance section instead of security. And what you'll find is that you're standing there holding a piece of paper saying, look, we did all the things in front of the board because you didn't actually solve the problem. You checked boxes. And sometimes checking boxes is important. It really is. There's compliance requirements all over the place. But the check marks are not a substitute for doing the right thing. And I think that's my echoing Rob's point there. So thank you.
Thank you, Chip. That's absolutely fabulous. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate your thoughts on that. Anybody want to go next, or?
I can go next.
Okay, Jason, thank you.
Sure. So I guess one other thing, Tim had mentioned a number of the resources that we have on CISA's website. We've been putting out a lot of checklists, a lot of playbooks for running through incident response scenarios. We have tabletop exercises in a box that you can download, run through a ransomware incident response scenario for your organization. But just to highlight a couple of the other services that we have too, we do have vulnerability assessments that are available to all critical infrastructure organizations at no cost. So CISA receives a lot of taxpayer funding to perform these vulnerability assessments, these in-person engagements where we're actually going to look at any vulnerabilities that you have, and we have a cyber hygiene service that you can sign up for at no cost as well. So I'll put my email address in chat if anybody has any questions about the resources that are available. I know I also get that information overload. CISA's putting out way too much stuff. Where do I start, or what do I need to do? Happy to chat with you and point you into the right direction of some of those resources that might make sense for your organization. But yeah, as of today, we're just pointing everybody to the Shields Up website. So like Rob mentioned, you're not recommending you go out purchase a whole bunch of security equipment. You might end up opening yourself up for more attacks and securing yourselves if you try to do too much. So we have a couple quick things that we're just recommending organizations implement to just increase their security posture right now in light of the geopolitical tension. So thanks for having me, and happy to chat with anybody who wants any additional resources from CISA.
Thank you, Jason. We appreciate it when you put your contact in the chat, because I think people really do want to reach out to all of you and just, have additional conversations or just certain questions. I do appreciate that. There is one question on asking about getting a site clearance. It's a hurdle for small companies and whatnot. Does anybody have anything that they think that, Tim, do you think that's something you would like to address?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so when we opened up our business originally, we became a cleared defense contractor, CDC, very early on out there. And so I'm not going to go over the whole breadth and depth of things out there, but some very basic things that you can be doing is number one, gain mentorship. So get yourself a contract or subcontract, I should say, with a larger corporation like Leidos or Manpower or whoever right out there who's already got a pre-existing contract. They can sponsor you for what they call a top secret or secret-based facilities clearance. NSA's got something called PISA. It's a professional industrial security the contract essentially that allows you to become cleared and bench cleared members prior to acquiring a contract, because sometimes you have to have the contract before you can get the cleared members, but you have to have the cleared members before you can get the contract. It becomes this catch-22. So I know all too well what you're going through. But the Intel community, So if you're looking to work with those 3-letter agencies or the areas of DoD, we can very easily help navigate you towards the resources out there. So feel free to reach out to me. I can tell you my personal journey. We own 2 companies with top secret facilities clearance now and do a lot of business in the DoD and IC space now. So was not a huge hurdle, and we were a nobody company just 5-6 years ago. So
wow, thank you for that advice. And actually, since you're already on the spot, do you mind giving us your final thoughts on this as well?
absolutely. And again, I think the whole point here is develop some sort of accountability of your systems and understand what you have to defend, understand what criticality should be assessed to those. Use the threat intelligence and also work on insider threat and educating your people. It does no good for you guys to make plans at the government level if nobody is communicated to how this plan is supposed to work. And I always tell people it's like a fire drill. Whenever you execute your first tabletop exercise, where you're basically testing all your policies and procedures, and you should be doing it at least quarterly. The first time you do a fire drill in a brand new building, it takes minutes or hours to get people out. You try to figure out accountability. Nobody knows what to do. Do that 5 or 6 times throughout the year, and I guarantee you become a well-oiled machine at it. And if you prep for the inevitable, when the inevitable does happen, hopefully it doesn't happen for a long time to you because you've prepped to be able to do so, you become resilient, which means you're going to be able to recover faster. You're going to be able to detect, remediate, and make those outreaches to your federal agencies. Take Jason up on those free resources that the government taxpayers is essentially paying to subsidize for you in the industry, or even if you're a consultant to the industry, there's a lot of resources out there that you can utilize to make your teams better. So knowledge is useless. It's not power unless you absolutely use it in some sort of meaningful capacity. So hopefully that helps anybody out there.
Excellent point. Yes, you utilize those resources, because if you're secure, that just improves overall security for everybody. So I agree with that completely. Aaron, I'm going to turn to you and ask you your final thoughts as well, and then I'm going to go and finish up with Rob.
Sure.
Thank you.
Mine obviously is more for the manufacturing people in the audience. But as I said, manufacturers are in the business of making things. And we should always be spending time trying to figure out what's going to get in the way of us making things. And in this case, you need your threat model to include cybersecurity attacks. And truth is, you probably should have had it on there 5 years ago, but today's a good day to start and start down that journey and trying to figure out a way to protect yourself, your company, in particular, your manufacturing infrastructure. I think that's the best I can say.
Thank you, Aaron. You're right. You know what? If you haven't started the journey yet, today's a great day to start. It's a new day. Let's do it, because it's important. Because when you implement cybersecurity and you have a strong security posture within your company, then you're just contributing to the strong security posture of our entire nation. And with everything going on right now, I think that you can see that it's inevitable and imperative. Rob, final thought.
I'll give a critical and I'll give a upbeat as we end it out. So the critical thing is, though I'm a big fan of CISA and the services we're talking about, I keep hearing free services. They are not free services. They are taxpayer funded services. So please, if you're a company that has done a lot of good security work and you need a little extra help, great job. Take advantage of them. They're there for national security purposes. If you're a company that hasn't done a lot of anything and it's your route to market, you are a drain on the taxpayer. So go do your stuff before just expecting to do free services. And that sounds really harsh, but it doesn't scale any other way. And I'm tired of being in these same conversations for the last 20 years. So we can do better. On the positive side of it, defense is absolutely doable. I hear this all the time, like, but Russia is coming after me or China is coming after me. Dude, they're like 18 to 30 years old. Government's their first job. They got PowerPoint management and daycare too. Like, they're humans. All right. So make sure you realize that there is no omnipotent power out there. It is just humans coming after you. You're more than capable of defending against that. And some of it's real basic at the end of the day. You absolutely can do it. Start with realizing that OT is different than IT, figuring out a plan that you want to put in place there and getting alignment. And even some of the basics of what the heck do I have in this environment and how can I configure it just a little bit better is going to be a significant increase in your security posture.
Perfect. Those are great points. And I hope that everybody has enjoyed and benefited from this particular webinar that we've had. I want to thank the panelists and the speakers for their time and their efforts that they've given today, because realize they are very busy gentlemen. They're all gentlemen. They're very busy gentlemen in their own lives, so and their own companies. So thank you so very much for your time. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to still put them in chat. I am doing a recording of this, if it's okay, and I'd be happy to send you a copy of the recording. If you email me and let me know, I'll put my email in the chat as well. Is there anything else that anybody has any questions on today? Otherwise, I will tell everybody to have an absolutely wonderful day. I hope that you have a good week, and keep your eyes open and shields up for everything going on. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.